There are moments in this sport when the tectonic plates shift. You do not always feel the tremor immediately. Often, it begins as a quiet murmur on an outer court, a mild surprise and a draw that most assume will right itself by the weekend. But sometimes, the shift happens on center stage, bathed in the sharp afternoon light of the Steffi Graf Stadion, and the whole architecture of the tour seems to tilt on its axis. We saw it in 1999 when a 16-year-old Jelena Dokic dismantled Martina Hingis on the lawns of SW19. We felt it when a teenage Boris Becker threw himself across the center court grass in 1985, entirely unburdened by the weight of history. Those were not just matches. They were announcements. They were declarations that the old order had been breached, that the hierarchy of the locker room no longer applied. What we witnessed in Berlin carries that same rare, unmistakable resonance. Alexandra Eala did not just defeat Elina Svitolina. She dismantled a veteran, a top 10 stalwart, a woman who has spent a decade navigating the deepest waters of the professional game. And she did it with a quiet, ruthless clarity that should send a chill through the rest of the tour. Grass court tennis is an unforgiving interrogator. It strips away the illusions that hard courts and clay can sometimes provide. On the dirt of Roland Garros, a player can hide a slight hesitation, a fraction of a second of doubt, behind a heavy topspin forehand or sliding defensive retrieval. The European clay affords you time. Grass steals it from you. The ball skids. The bounces are infinitely lower, often erratic, carrying the faint memory of a harsh winter and a damp spring. You must commit to your shots before the ball crosses a net. Hesitation on a grass court is fatal. And what struck me most vividly about this 21-year-old Filipina was her absolute refusal to hesitate. When she walked onto the court against the Ukrainian, the historical weight heavily favored the established star. Svitolina arrived in Germany carrying the momentum of a spectacular clay court season, having just conquered IGA Swiatek and Coco Gauff to claim a title in May. She is a woman who understands the geometry of the court better than almost anyone of her generation. Yet, against Eala, Svitolina looked rushed. She looked uncomfortable. She looked like a player trying to solve a puzzle, while the pieces were constantly changing shape. This was a 6-3, 6-4 victory that felt far more comprehensive than the scoreline suggests. To understand the magnitude of this result, we must look not just at what transpired over those 83 minutes, but the astonishing preamble that brought Eala to this stage. Just days prior, she shocked the tennis establishment by eliminating Elena Rybakina, the world number 2, in the round of 16. Rybakina, with her booming, effortless power, is tailor-made for the slick lawns. Defeating Rybakina is a feat that requires immense tactical discipline. To follow that up by beating a tactical mastermind like Svitolina requires something else entirely. It requires a profound emotional maturity. So many young players achieve a career-defining upset, only to suffer a catastrophic letdown in the very next round. They empty their emotional reserve scaling the mountain, leaving nothing for the descent. Eala proved immune to that familiar affliction. The match itself was a masterclass in aggressive, first-strike tennis. From the very first ball, Eala imposed her will. She raced to a 3-0 lead in the opening set, instantly neutralizing Svitolina's greatest weapon, her counterpunching rhythm. Svitolina is a master of the agonizingly long rally. She builds points like a stonemason builds a wall, brick by exhausting brick, until her opponent succumbs to the sheer physical and mental fatigue of the exchange. Eala simply refused to play that game. The Filipino wildcard utilized her serve not merely to start the point, but to dictate its conclusion. Winning a staggering 79% of her first serve points, Eala took the racket out of Svitolina's hands. When you are serving with that kind of precision on a grass court, hitting your spots wide in the ad court and driving the ball into the body on the due side, you reduce the returner to a state of constant panic reaction. Svitolina, to her immense credit, did not fold. Champions of her caliber rarely do. Down 4-1 in the first set, the Ukrainian dug into the trenches, relying on the sheer force of her competitive character to drag the score back to 4-3. This is precisely the juncture where a lesser, less seasoned player crumbles. The stadium grows quiet. The veteran begins to find her length. The narrative of the inevitable comeback starts writing itself in the minds of the spectators. But Eala did not panic. She absorbed the surge, steadied her breathing, and closed out the set 6-3. That sequence, that specific refusal to yield ground when the pressure was most suffocating, tells me more about Alexandra Eala's future than any technical breakdown of her forehand grip. The second set offered a similar psychological examination. Eala established a commanding 5-3 lead, serving for the match. Again, Svitolina mounted a desperate rearguard action, breaking to close the gap to 5-4. For a brief, agonizing window, the prospect of deciding set hung heavy in the humid Berlin air. But Eala simply wiped the slate clean. She stepped up to the baseline, found the corners of the service box, and served out the match with the cold-blooded efficiency of a veteran with 50 titles to her name. 3 aces across the match might not sound like an avalanche of unreturnable serves, but on critical points, her delivery was unreadable. Eala disguised her toss beautifully, maintaining identical mechanics, whether she was kicking the ball out wide or flattening it down the tee. This aggressive baseline game Eala has constructed is not a sudden, happy accident. It is the culmination of an outstanding, deeply impressive grass court campaign. She arrived in Berlin possessing a WTA 125 title from Birmingham, a tournament with its own rich history of identifying future Wimbledon contenders. She currently boasts an astonishing 9 victories in her last 10 outings on this surface. Consider the rarity of that statistic. Grass is the most specialized surface in professional tennis. The season is brutally short. Most players spend the month of June merely trying to find their footing, complaining about bad bounces, struggling to adapt their extreme Western grips to the low-skidding ball. Eala has embraced the idiosyncrasies of the lawn. She takes the ball exceptionally early, stepping inside the baseline to cut off the angle, rushing the opponent's recovery time. It is a style reminiscent of early career Andre Agassi, or, more recently, the flat, penetrating strikes of Petra Kvitova. When you strike the ball that cleanly, that flatly, the grass court essentially amplifies your power. We must also contextualize profound disappointment this defeat represents for Svitolina. She has been playing inspired, emotionally charged tennis this season. The title on the European clay was a beautiful reminder of her enduring class. She dismantled Anna Kalinskaya and Eva Liss earlier in this tournament, suggesting a seamless transition from the slow dirt to the slick grass. But against Eala, she was structurally unraveled. Svitolina's second serve, often the barometer of her confidence, yielded only 48% of points won in previous tough encounters. And here, she struggled to protect it against Eala's aggressive returns. Svitolina likes to use her backhand down the line to change direction and break open the court, but Eala's depth kept the Ukrainian pin behind the baseline, hitting off her back foot. You cannot win on a grass court if your weight is constantly moving backward. The geometry of the court simply will not allow it. Beyond the tactical geometry, there is a broader narrative here that we cannot ignore. The Women's Tennis Association is currently undergoing a fascinating, turbulent generational shift. Swiatek dominates the clay. Sabalenka and Rybakina wield immense power on hard courts. Gauff has cemented her status as an elite force. But beneath that established upper echelon, a fierce scramble for territory is unfolding. Players like Eala are no longer content to merely serve an apprenticeship. They are arriving fully formed, possessing the physical conditioning and the tactical acumen to threaten the very top tier immediately. The respect Eala showed Svitolina before the match, acknowledging the Ukrainians' immense fighting spirit and invaluable experience, was genuine. But reverence off the court was entirely absent between the lines. This victory thrust Eala into her first WTA 500 semifinal, pushing her ranking into the top 35, an unprecedented milestone for a Filipina player. The sporting history of the Philippines is rich and deeply passionate, but tennis has rarely been its primary export. Eala is shouldering the hopes of an entire nation, a pressure that can crush a young athlete. Yet, she carries it with a remarkably light step. Her composure is almost unnerving. When Svitolina attempted to change the pace, throwing the occasional slice, or looping a heavier ball deep to baseline, Eala simply bent her knees, lowered her center of gravity, and drove the ball back with interest. Look closely at Eala's footwork. The true masters of grass court tennis, Federer, Sampras, Navratilova, did not run on grass. They glided. They utilized a series of tiny, precise adjustment steps to ensure they were perfectly balanced at the moment of impact. Heavy, thunderous movement is punished on the lawns. Eala already possesses that delicate, almost feline footwork. She anticipates beautifully, reading the racket face of her opponent to steal a fraction of a second in reaction time. Svitolina, whose movement is traditionally her greatest asset, looked heavy-legged by comparison, constantly stretched into uncomfortable, defensive postures. What does this mean for the immediate future? Wimbledon begins on June 29th. The lush, pristine lawns of the All England Club are waiting. Historically, performance in Berlin or Eastbourne is the most reliable leading indicator of success in London. By dispatching the world number 2 and the world number 8 in consecutive matches, Eala has violently altered the Wimbledon calculus. No seeded player in the draw will want to see the young Filipina's name near theirs in the bracket. She has transitioned from a dangerous floater to a legitimate, formidable threat. The grass court season is a sprint, and momentum is everything. Eala has the wind at her back, the belief coursing through her veins, and the kind of fearless, unscarred psychology that only youth provides. For Elina Svitolina, the road requires recalibration. She is far too intelligent, far too resilient to let this derail her season. She knows that on any given day, an inspired opponent playing perfect first-strike tennis can take the racket out of your hands on grass. She will head to London. She will refine her return positioning, and she will undoubtedly fight with the same fierce, unyielding pride that has defined her entire career. But even she must recognize that she ran into a player touched by something special this afternoon. As the shadows lengthen across the Steffi Graf Stadion, we are left to contemplate the broader trajectory of this sport. Tennis is a game of constant, relentless renewal. Just as we begin to map out the established boundaries of the elite, a new force emerges from the periphery to redraw the map entirely. Alexandra Eala's breakthrough in Berlin is not a fleeting anomaly. It is the arrival of a complete, dangerous, tactically astute competitor. She possesses a firepower to hit through the heavy conditions, the finesse to manipulate the low bounce, and, crucially, the icy temperament required to silence a legendary champion. We are watching the architecture of the women's tour change before our eyes. The great theater of Wimbledon beckons, and the script has just been radically rewritten by a 21-year-old who simply refuses to wait her turn. The echoes of this victory will resonate far beyond the German capital, lingering in the locker rooms and practice courts long after the final ball of the summer is struck.